Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by our very own Cormac Eklof. Cormac, Senior Program Manager at Vistatec. You're very welcome here today, Cormac, on VistaTalks.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
Great to see you. Let's get on to the show straight away and let's jump right into the discussion. Let's kick it off with this fast-paced world that you're involved in, program management. What attracts you to this fast-paced, crazy world of program management?
Well, attraction is a strong word, but I think I kind of fell into it after college, into the gradual procession towards it, I suppose, from project management to program management. And I suppose they go hand in hand, and it's been 20 plus years in the making. So again, attraction, extremely strong word, but there's definitely been a kind of a gradual build and climb, I suppose, into the program management world via the trenches of project management, as it were.
Yeah, interestingly, people often speak and sort of flip between project and program, but there are very clear differences. And it's interesting that you use the term, working, sort of earning your stripes through the trenches to get into that sort of world of senior program management, because it's quite a complex layered structure, really, when you're working at a world-class level.
Well, I don't know about world class, but some class anyway. But we do, like, you have to kind of, as you say, earn your stripes. But the other thing, the advantage is if you've been through project management for any extent, really, you have a good idea of what's happening on a foundation level below you, as you kind of, you understand what's happening in the project management level, and that helps you in your own role.
Yeah, for sure. So look, let's before we get into that, then let's have a little trip down memory lane. Let's talk about your studies. It was quite an interesting mix. You had social science, information technology, politics, history, and all this was done at University College Dublin, if I'm correct in saying that.
Mm-hmm.
So what sort of led you to those sort of four subjects, and did they sort of come together and synergize your sort of professional or personal journey, or what made you take those tracks initially, and do they help you these days?
I love that you use the words professional and so forth, because this answer is anything but professional. But I remember the CAO forum back in God knows when, 90 or something like that. Yeah. And I remember I was minding my parents' house, filling out the CAO form on my own, and someone told me that social science, there was a very high girl to guy ratio in the class, and I chose social science. So that's basically the only reason I fell into that lane. However, it did prove extremely interesting. I loved it. It was fascinating. And one of the most interesting parts was they had a brand new course called information technology, which seemed like a bit of a laugh at the time. And it was, I think it was the first course in Ireland around that time. And UCD had it, and they had some really interesting lecturers. And we had everything from making a database, literally creating a database. So people were creating databases of movies, and I think I did something to do with soccer or something. And we had some other basic stuff like what is a fax machine, or what is a very, very basic stuff. But we also had a visionary lecturer, a really, really interesting guy who was throwing out terms like misinformation and the importance of, or the dangers of technology and information being molded together for the future. And I found myself recently thinking about some of those lectures, because the guy was way ahead of his time with his concerns about the dangers of mass information and the human mind, and the manipulation of information and so forth. So it's really, really fascinating stuff. So although I have to admit, I fell into that course, it was fascinating, and definitely a gentle primer towards the IT world.
You kind of dated yourself with the database of fax machines, yeah. But you saved it with the when you think about back then, to be talking about misinformation back then was absolutely streets ahead, because we've come through a very heavy period, haven't we, of that being a very sort of front of house topic for lots of reasons,
Absolutely, yeah. And you notice it. I'm based in the States now, but having come from Ireland, you notice the difference in the way information is handled. Ireland, there's definitely a much stronger emphasis on reality, and you get away with far less in Ireland, frankly. Over here in the States, it is sadly pretty much anything goes. You can stand on the street corner and say, "I am Elvis," and 10 people will think you're Elvis. So it's misinformation is king over here, unfortunately.
Oh
But
dear.
yeah.
So let's understand a little bit then, because you mentioned that obviously your education is in Ireland, but you've mentioned that you're living obviously in the US now. So let's talk about sort of the start of your career as this sort of project manager and earning those stripes, and how that sort of morphed into this senior program management role that you do at Vistatec.
Yeah, well, again, so the information technology course was probably one of the few things I was able to put back on my CV back in the 90s as to that was relevant to the new roles that were popping up. I remember my mother at the time showing me an ad for a localization role and explaining to me what localization was. Again, this was a long time ago when it was a new industry and it was just kind of gathering pace. At the time, I think the first couple of roles I had were around quality. What do you call it? Testing. So the first role I had was in a place called Digital, which I think is Compaq now, or Compaq a while ago anyway. I'm not even sure if they're still around. But the first job I had was testing Internet Explorer 3, which
Wow.
is yeah.
Wow.
So on a team that was testing that, and it was interesting. It was cool, and it was a good. I remember doing my Windows network exams and that kind of thing. So all that testing world, I went through that for a few years, and finally started to get interest in or to gather interest in project management roles, which felt a little bit like a logical progression from quality and testing into project management. It helped with stuff like, this sounds like I'm doing an interview now, but it helped with stuff like attention to detail and that kind of thing, coming
Yeah.
from quality into project management. And then project management I was in for several years until I finally started to build that into program management roles, as it were, and this current role.
Yeah, and I mean, what a journey, because from Internet Explorer 3, wow,
Yes. I
through
think
to
they're on 4
today.
now, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
To the wonderful world of Google and automated everything, and smartphones and technologies and AI, and it's an incredible journey, isn't it? In such a short period of time, I think.
Well, thanks for saying short, but
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I,
but like in the grand scheme of things, we've come a long way in a short period of time from an information technology perspective, for sure.
that
Um,
makes me think of one role I had with AOL. And AOL had a base in Ireland for supporting the
yes,
English market.
yeah,
And I was with their tech support team for about a year and a half or so. And one of the main things we had to do was help people troubleshoot their modems. Some people probably don't even know what modems are. So that was an experience, to say the least.
very good, very good. So look, I wanted to reference an interview that you had a while back now, and you were talking specifically about the key elements of sort of the role and this program management, and you were talking about the flexibility that you need, sort of to wear the operations hat 1 minute, the sales hat the next minute, the team management hat, and then you sort of spoke a little bit about mentoring and developing within the same sort of context. So could you just, I've mentioned a few things there, but could you maybe just expand on that and unpack that a little bit for the people listening to this?
Yeah, well, program management is essentially when you look at the accounts and the programs you're dealing with. I think the way I like to look at it is essentially a program manager is the glue in those accounts and programs. That's a bit of a cliche, but you're bringing all the different disciplines and entities together. So everything from your own team, your own project management team, and then not to mention your own internal teams. So with Vistatec, you've got where we have extremely strong support. Um, we have tech support, we have ATG, you have DTP, all the other different types of technical groups. The HR team is often interested in what's happening on the account, and marketing and all the other internal teams that come together to support a Vistatec team in a program or account globally. So first of all, there's that aspect, and there's an awful lot that goes into that. You know, if you're building something new, you're touching all sorts of different points. And on top of that, then internally, then you have the client you're dealing with, and the vendors, and the ecosystem around that, the actual program itself. So there's a ton of different groups to consider and to bring together, and get talking on the same page and get moving in the same direction, I suppose. So that's probably one of the major elements. And there's two aspects to that, as you mentioned. There's kind of an operations aspect and kind of a sales aspect to it as well. The sales team obviously has a much more focused role around the, particularly around the start, bringing in business and that kind of thing. But when you're actually up and running, sometimes you have to wear kind of a sales hat depending who you're dealing with. From an operations perspective, obviously we have to kind of support and direct and drive our own teams forward. But with a client, you're often dealing with not just the client, but their own internal stakeholders and other groups associated, and of course the other vendors as well. And you are representing Vistatec. You have to bear that in mind as you're going through campaigns and as you're going through discussions and meetings. You definitely have to think towards while you're currently maybe fixing something in the present, you definitely have to think towards the future with a bit of a sales hat on when you're dealing with those disparate, varied groups.
Right. And so obviously there's a real big importance on listening to the clients and what the needs are. And then, of course, you need to communicate that back to the various teams, be it your own team, your own departments, or different departments within Vistatec or within clients' organizations. So the importance here around technology, language, but also this effective communication, like for a program manager to be truly effective. Like communication seems to be a big part of this then.
Oh, absolutely. A massive, and I mean, it can't be understated, actually, I suppose, in the program management world, the value of communication and the importance of communication. And yeah, you hit on a very interesting point there, that the listening, it really is crucial, I think, and it's the key to success in so many ways, because the client will tell you exactly what they want. You just have to be able to parse that out of whatever discussion is happening and turn it into actionable items for your own. I guess you have to translate it for your own teams and your own management and so forth, and really focus on what they need and sometimes they'll tell you what they need, and there might be some more aspects to it as well that you can consider and just make their lives easier, basically. And I think that's a part of it, with Vistatec. I think we do a very good job of what my director Alan calls boutique project management and boutique program management as well. And really what that is I think it gives kind of an interesting image and a fun image, but it really is rolling out, taking out the chocks and rolling out everything for the client. And it's focused. That sounds a bit open and as if we're doing a little bit too much, but it's very focused into the client needs and so forth, and ensuring that we support them to the point where, we have one client who a few years ago told us basically he was able to keep a small project management team because he saw our project management team as an extension of his team. And that's absolute gold from a client, obviously, where you get to that level of trust. So all that kind of listening to the client's needs and ensuring that those are met, and even going further if possible, builds that trust that leads to success.
That's very interesting, because we've had fairly recently, actually, we had Owen Villiers on the VistaTalks show. And obviously, Owen, the Chief Sales Officer for Vistatec around the world. And, one of the things that Owen, I know, speaks about passionately is this sort of bespoke nature to what Vistatec does through listening to its clients, rolling out those sort of bespoke global content solutions, as opposed to having a traditional translation, localization, LSP type conversation. So yeah, it's very interesting to hear you speak about it in that sort of context. So look, we're talking about Vistatec right now, and Vistatec obviously it communicates and works with lots of global organizations all around the world. A lot of the big brands that people would know and love are Vistatec clients. So obviously you can't go into too much detail here, but maybe you could sort of explain a little bit about the world-class programs or any sort of keys to providing that sort of gold standard service, and why. The reason what I'm really trying to drive at here is a lot of Vistatec customers, once they become a Vistatec customer, they seem to stay for a long time. They really grow with the business. And so have you got any sort of tips or sort of little nuggets of wisdom that helps people to build that world-class program management?
Yeah, well, as you said, NDAs are a wonderful thing, and they do hamper us a little when we're trying to talk about various clients and so forth. But I think, the main thing for me is having come from, you mentioned a moment ago, the way LSPs and vendors may do business, in the classic way, I suppose, is Vistatec tends to take, and Vistatec is in a position to be able to take a much more holistic quality approach towards these setups, and the focus is always on quality. And I think that's one of the first key points is high quality, basically, over numbers, over volume, over other kind of classic features of accounts. I'm really, one thing I'm very proud of being involved in Vistatec is the approach and focus to quality over everything. And that is only possible through the extended Vistatec ecosystem. As I mentioned previously, the different groups that we have, a lot of really high quality people in these groups, everything from sales to marketing to IT to development and multimedia and so forth. And we touch all of those in our major clients and programs that we're working on, and we rely on those and lean on those. So having those, there's no shortcuts really. Having those pieces in place is crucial, and Vistatec's very, very lucky to have some really high quality, not just technically proficient, but positive and progressive people in those roles. And that, instead of, so if we're in a program, we have a big problem, we're trying to develop something, trying to fix something, being able to turn around and get such high quality support internally is really, I think it's quite unusual, having been in the business for 20 plus years and seen a lot of vendors and a lot of other LSPs and how they do things. The approach we take is refreshing, but not just refreshing and unusual, but also highly focused and successful, frankly. And that, at the end of the day, that ends up with this lovely thing where you're delighting the client, as they say in inverted commas. And if they have a problem, you're able to fix it internally without bringing in other vendors or other groups. And that is something that definitely leads to that level of delight with the client. So, that's a long answer to a short question. There's really no way to, there's no magic sauce or secret recipe or anything like that. It is a organizational approach towards this careful foundation building, first of all, where you have all these teams in place, and then ensuring a very strong quality approach to fixing problems and to how you want to move things forward. Again, not taking shortcuts and making sure that things are done the right way. So that's on an organization level, I think, and obviously it's not one item, but it's an approach really, and I think the Vistatec approach is very well received by the big clients we work with, who appreciate that kind of support, turnaround, and approach.
Oh, thank you, Cormac. What springs to mind is when I'm talking to Phil Ritchie, the CTO of Vistatec, as I'm sure you know Phil well. And you mentioned it earlier, actually, you referenced ATG, the Applied Technologies Group. And as you were speaking there, I was thinking an awful lot about the quality and the development work sometimes that we do from a bespoke nature, all in-house a lot of the times. And I know Phil, if Phil was here today, he'd be speaking an awful lot about, being technology agnostic, and if he can take something and use it and it's the best fit for the client, he's had no qualms in doing that. But often, sometimes you have to build a bespoke solution from the ground up for a client. So it is nice having both of those levers, I suppose. available.
Absolutely, yeah. No, we have with several very, very big clients, some biggest in the world, frankly, in their disciplines. We've had Phil and his team create um, customized, focused platforms, entire platforms, like enormous solutions that have, frankly, blown the clients, blown them away with the efficiency and success levels those platforms create. So Phil and the team are able to get access to client systems and integrate them with our own and create these customized platforms that are just, frankly, they're fantastic tools on every level, from production through finance and quality. Brings everything together in the program, and we've built a few of these now. That I'm sure we built several more, actually, that I don't have visibility to, but we've built a few that are really, groundbreaking stuff, frankly, and really, really functional, usable, but also very progressive, and they just create these massive efficiencies on the account that push everything forward. And again, another item that's kind of a delight to the client.
Great. So in your opinion then, touching on this, improving things for an organization and brands focusing on back to that global content solutions, as opposed to not simply localization and translation, then that's fundamental to the programs that you're running at the scale that you're running them at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's not with these big organizations, once you have built levels of trust over a few years and working in certain areas, you often branch out into other areas, be it a bit of testing, a bit of multimedia work on top of your original remit of either translation or review. So you end up in this kind of multifaceted world with where they're leaning on your approach and your quality and your success levels, and you're kind of adding to that organization. And Vistatec's doing that for a number of large clients that I'm working with, and it's a testament to our ability to be flexible with all the different groups that we have internally, but also a huge testament to the strength of our project management team in particular. We obviously we have some really high quality people working on these accounts, and we end up in situations where our own project management team is integral to these major clients, to the groups we're dealing with. So it's it's a really interesting mix of different disciplines and entities, and our ability to be flexible in those.
Thank you. And so let's move on a little bit then. And this year in particular and last year has been quite challenging for many people. Some organizations have seen huge growth, particularly in the technology space that we've kind of touched on today. Some technology companies are doing exceptionally well during the sort of time that we've been in the pandemic. Other companies not so well. Other industries, for example, have been quite severely restricted. So it's been very uneven, but either way, it's been challenging for lots of people, not just in a work or a business or an industry sector perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So I wanted to ask you, because obviously you're managing a whole program, there's various teams and departments. So what's this working from home, working remotely? How's that affected things from your perspective? Has it impacted it at all? Has it made it more effective, more efficient? Are you longing for the days where everybody's back in an office? Or what are your views on this when it relates to global program management?
Yeah, it's a massive question, really. There's so much to unpack in that, and I suppose I'll start with on a personal level. We, the way we have our different teams built up with the clients we work with, we were a mix, I suppose, of getting to press the flesh and shake hands and make progress in the business world in person, but we also had a very strong presence globally. And that obviously translates to virtually, because you're not good. In our world, it's not sensible to be hopping around the globe, visiting your various teams and so forth. Everything happens virtually for a reason, and a large part of it comes back to one of the major aspects of the service we provide to three the bigger clients that I'm working with, and I know it's extended around the biggest client we have and others as well. And it's a phrase that Heather and Alan came up with, the follow the sun global project management approach. And what that means is hitting all the time zones basically, and the level of support goes around the globe and never stops basically. And we have our team, the project management teams have become incredibly good at this pass the baton approach of support. So if an issue crops up in GMT, we can work in it in PST, even in APAC if we have to, and basically move that issue or any other topic so forth around the clock. So, you know, say if you're working with a PST client and something has cropped up, you can work in it overnight and have that problem fixed before the client's even in their office or sitting down having their morning coffee at home. So that approach has led to a very kind of a strong focus on this global virtual setup anyway. So the major clients that I work on, we have project management resources all over the world, literally, from places as far flung as Rosario in Argentina to Hong Kong. And with those resources, we have our communication set up in place where everybody feels very connected. And we put a lot of effort into that to make sure that that feeling of connection is there, and that ability to solve problems together in a virtual world. So we've been doing that for years anyway. So when COVID popped its merry little head up, we were able to adjust quite quickly to that. And I think obviously it helped, particularly our strength, our project management team was able to adjust quickly and you know, still be functional and provide, you know, high level solutions and success levels to our major clients. So that, you know, COVID it's presented all sorts of challenges, which Vistatec has. I think I'm glad to work for an organization that has kept such a strong focus on making sure everyone's safe and comfortable and supported in this unusual world we're in now after COVID. But yeah, the change to this virtual world in particular, it presents a few challenges. You know, some organizations over here are trying to get back into the office. They are already to some level, to a small percentage. However, obviously, as things change, as we're seeing right now with the new Delta variant, things may never be the same again. So there has to be a very flexible approach. The one thing I miss is that the ability to, what do they call them, water cooler deals and conversations. So that's what they call them over here anyway. The ability to have those sidebar conversations where you can you know, find out really get the zeitgeist of what's happening at the time and that kind of thing. You know, so that's probably the one thing I miss, I suppose. Other than that, we're able to, thankfully, we're in a very good position. We're able to carry on and continue to be successful in the virtual world.
Thank you very much for that, Cormac. So just teasing that out a little bit more, maybe away from Vistatec, maybe to more of sort of a wider view. I'd be interested in your thoughts, because there's a lot of change going on globally, and you've touched on quite a few of them. And obviously, I think maybe the localization industry as a whole was maybe a little bit better suited. And, you know, if as an industry, it hasn't really stopped. If anything, it sped up the business and grew the business, because more and more brands all of a sudden needed to become digital. They needed to get online. Their content changed overnight. You know, it was kind of a big increase for some organizations, not all, but some. But in this sort of global topic of, you know, working from home, we hear people talking about 4-day work weeks. You're talking about in the US how some companies are trying to encourage people back to their offices, and then there's various variants that are throwing things up. But when it comes to work culture, do you think there are going to be further impacts and opportunities for the localization industry? Or do you think it'll just be business as usual? This will just be the way it is for quite some time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating topic, and you hit something there that's very interesting, I think, and it's one of the keys to to figuring out who has been relatively successful in this period and who has been less successful, and that is the digital world, basically. And if you any business that's in the digital world and that's adapting quickly and focusing on that is making progress. I think we're involved with a couple of very large clients who identified very quickly that the digital world was the way to go, basically. And there's, for better or for worse, there's definitely a move away from bricks and mortar. and a push towards digitalization, and that goes hand in hand, I think, with this whole virtual world we're not creating, but we're building, or developing even further. And I think change, or more progress, is inevitable. I think there's more coming. I think companies such as Vistatec are learning how to support the global teams in this new world. And I think there's going to be, the one thing I can imagine is going to happen is we're going to see more innovation and development, particularly around the day-to-day for your teams. So how we stay connected. We're on a Zoom call now, and if you recall, a year and a half ago, there's lots of people who'd never heard of Zoom, so as an entity, and so I just think there's probably going to be more that's going to come in terms of how we communicate and how we work on a daily basis. Because right now we're still using the tools we used 2, 3, 4 years ago, and some of them are trying to adapt to new features like presentations and so forth, and the ability to work together. So whiteboarding in a virtual world. So maybe you and I, in the next 5 minutes, we can hash something out that will be progressive and amazing in the world. But I think there's something, definitely brighter minds than ours will come together and put together some kind of all-in platform that's going to really open up the working world, in the virtual world, because I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think the emphasis has to be on that, because there's a lot of businesses that aren't going to go back into the office for, I don't know, a year to come, maybe even more, depending on obviously where we are. But one of the few good things that's come from a terrible thing in COVID is this new push for innovation and development and progress. And I think it's something that can be a little bright spark in a tough period for many, and should be interesting to see what comes of it in the next few years.
No, couldn't agree more. I think the innovation, and something that I know we talk a lot about, the agility, the ability to change and to move and to adapt to a certain situation quickly and effectively, notwithstanding the importance of quality that you were talking about earlier. That has to run sort of through it consistently. But it has been a big change. There were a lot of companies that were not digitally savvy and have had to make some pretty rapid changes to their businesses. There have been some businesses that were already digitally savvy and have sort of capitalized on that. And yet, whether it's travel and hospitality or, the leisure sort of industries, they've been particularly hard done by. Very small independent restaurants, those kind of places originally were, very, very tough trading environments, because there basically wasn't anything. Everywhere was shuttered. So I know it's different depending on which part of the world you're in, but I think you're right. You make a very good point, Cormac, about the tools that we're using today are sort of seeing us through this current time, but they are tools that were probably around for a few years anyway. We just kind of had to rely on them more. And you were mentioning earlier, weren't you, about modems and fax machines? Could you imagine if it had hit then without the tools in place? I think it would be a very different environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just finishing off then, I did want to touch on one more thing from my perspective. Then I'm going to ask you if I've missed anything or if there's anything else that you want to share. But talking about change, obviously you've done a big change because you've moved from Ireland to the US. And I know in Ireland, I wanted to ask you about baseball, because baseball I associate with, I know it's a global sport. I know there are pockets of it, but I wouldn't really associate baseball with Ireland. But you were sort of very instrumental in the adult baseball league as a coordinator for Ireland. So could you maybe just share a little bit about that? Because it's a bit niche for Ireland, but more mainstream for the US.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, people in the US don't know that there's baseball in Ireland, and then there's people in Ireland who don't know there's baseball in Ireland. So
right.
It's probably more well known on continental Europe, ironically, than in other places. But it's funny, you can never really get away from the IT world. It all came from when American businesses, in particular, started to throng to Ireland back in the 70s and 80s. They brought with it, everything associated with that, including softball at the time, which is a slow pitch, underhand pitch version of baseball. And all these corporate softball teams started to pop up around Dublin in particular, and it grew in the 80s and into into the 90s. At one stage, I was at a softball tournament in Galway in 97, and there was 84 different teams at it. So from all over Ireland, obviously, and it was a massive weekend tournament. But that's to give you an idea how popular the sport was, and still is, I believe, and its association with the IT world in particular. So from that grew a bunch of guys decided they wanted to try baseball. And by 96, the Irish national team was already competing in the European Championships. The first one, we got to travel all over the world, which was exciting. And the first one was in Hull in England, not the most glamorous, no offense to Hull. Just a slight pause there. So yeah, we had an amazing experience with Baseball Ireland, being able to travel to these European Championships every 2 years and see all these incredible places like Stockholm and Regensburg in Germany and Croatia, Dubrovnik and Karlovac and all these amazing places. And it's really funny. You had the same experience there where, say, for example, Prague, we'd turn up in this beautiful city and we'd be there for a day getting ready. And the next day we'd head out to the facility and you're expecting a field and a donkey and a few people hanging around. And at Prague, we traveled about 20 minutes outside the city, and there's this incredible baseball facility with 2 beautiful fields side by side, a clubhouse, changing rooms, and a bar with a restaurant. This is, so it's surprisingly popular in Europe. I can name any amount of unusual places that there's these gorgeous baseball facilities, and it's really, really popular in like France, Italy, Germany, semi-professional in France actually, and I think possibly even in the higher levels in Germany and England. So it has a surprisingly big support base around Europe. Ireland, we've had some success at international level. We've some medals and in different tournaments, particularly in the kind of 2004 to 2008 period. And it was a lot of fun being associated with that, and the travel and the team camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. It was great, but it's it's a surprisingly big sport in Europe, and it's catching on quickly in Ireland, where they're focusing lately on the youth levels. There's a number of youth teams around Ireland, and they're putting a lot of effort and trying to build the next generation of Irish baseball players, as it were. So it's a fun organization, baseballireland.com. It's where if you're interested in swinging a bat or throwing a ball, and obviously weekend warrior stuff. Everybody's got normal jobs, so. But definitely a fun and organization with a lot of kind of great stuff associated with it.
That's great to hear, and I'm learning something all the time because Vistatec has another show called X Cultural, which I'm sure you're aware of. And on the first episode of X Cultural, we were talking to somebody who looks after localization for Lyft, the ride-sharing company. But it was about baseball, or Major League Baseball. And it was interesting how actually it had traveled the world as a sport. But it's only because I'm not involved in it. It's only when you start looking, you realize how big this is. And it reminds me, you're talking about Dublin and how NFL games now get played in some of the biggest stadiums in Dublin now. Whereas, of course, it would have been traditionally either football or soccer, or, of course, GAA sports. So it's amazing. And you mentioned the Applied Technologies Group, and I know there's a basketball team that Vistatec has sponsored from time to time. So, it's amazing how sport crosses those borders, doesn't it? It seems to be a global aspect that sort of bonds us all together.
And essential in our world because it keeps us active as well. So next time I'm in Dublin, I have to check out the ATG basketball team. I used to play in UCD, so.
There you go. I should put a word in now. It is good. And I think particularly as hopefully we come out of a pandemic and, things get back to whatever the new normal looks like. But particularly you mentioned youth, and particularly getting people who've been cooped up for the last year and a half or even longer, depending on how long this thing continues, again, depending on which part of the world you're in. Getting people active again is really important. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great insight. Look, I've asked you an awful lot there. I do appreciate your time today here on VistaTalks. But is there anything else you'd like to share, Cormac, or anything that you think we should mention before we wrap up today?
No, I can't. No, Simon, I can't think of anything. I mean, that was very interesting, though. Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it.
That's no problem at all. Well, look, that brings us nicely to the close, to the end of today's show with Cormac Eklof, Senior Program Manager here at Vistatec. So please make sure to tune in again and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again, we hope to be discussing more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you, Cormac.
Thanks a lot, Simon.